Advanced TV Herstory, the podcast that brings you fresh perspective on the importance of TV in our lives. We tell stories of leadership, persistence, and achievement of TV women, because in the lives of women, no other media platform has influenced or inspired so many. Lo, these 60 years. Women of all ages have been impacted by what they've seen and will see on TV. So join us for a little advanced TV herstory by streaming it directly on our website, tvherstory.com, or anywhere you find podcasts. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams. Hey TV Herstoryans, it's Cynthia Bemis Abrams, and I am here today celebrating the fact that we have completed 3 years of producing Advanced TV Herstory. It is kind of exciting because it has been quite an evolution. The podcast today is not what I thought it was going to be 3 years ago when I first started it. I honestly didn't know where it was going to go. But lo and behold, there continues to be sort of a greater focus, a greater understanding of where this fits into the conversation taking place throughout America and, in fact, the world with regard to women and representation and equity and storytelling and voice and inclusion, all of those things. I was not thinking that 3 years ago. But it's my honor to produce this podcast. And it's my honor to continue thinking about how it is that this narrative can land in your ears and provide you something that takes you a little further, that puts a spring in your step and gives you the power to rise to your own challenges, your occasion, and continue to find your voice in this world. A year ago, you may recall, I decided I would create more focus to this podcast. I would strive to find stories, to tell stories, to do my research that framed it in the element of persistence, because it's really, we do not know. We who are not on the outside of TV production have no idea the persistence that is required in order to move something from an idea all the way to becoming a broadcast or a Netflix production. We just don't know. But what we do find out when women tell their stories of the persistence, it's fascinating. I also thought it was important that we do what we can to frame their experiences in the context of leadership. Because even today, there still is not that much curriculum out there that is oriented toward women's leadership. And we can't simply rely on Sheryl Sandberg and lean in as, oh, this is the Julia Child cookbook of leadership. It just isn't the case. We have to find our stories when we can learn just a little bit and also glean that sense of energy and accomplishment that came from each one of these stories. So I continue to look for stories where we really can identify a leadership component, because that makes leadership learning much more fun than standing at the airport and looking at books about leadership written by men, white men. Lastly, so 3 categories that I was looking at: persistence, leadership, and achievement. Now, we could say that every episode of Advanced TV Herstory in some way includes achievement, right? Because the working conditions, we are now learning, are sometimes horrendous, horrific. They are filled with lots of slights and points that damage dignity and integrity. And so the achievement, though, that I continue to focus on are those who really had the long haul, the great opportunity. They rose to an occasion, and they really are stars in their own right. So I'm just going to share with you some of the podcast episodes from this year that stood out for me in these important categories. They are the ones that if you have a chance and you haven't been reviewing the back catalog, or it's just bogged down in your playlist, really do find the opportunity to listen. And you can do that either by subscribing or just going to TV Herstory or anywhere where podcasts are found and just press play on the episode. In the category of persistence, 2 that stood out for me, wow, They were both really fun to produce, fun to prepare for. The first was the interview with Bill Jankowski, who co-wrote Patty Duke's final memoir. Her first one was very much about her growing up, the early part of her career, and that book was from 1985. But in 2016, Bill Jankowski and Patty Duke were putting the finishing touches on a series of oral, of interviews that she gave him, that they were working on the narration for and all of that when she passed in a somewhat untimely fashion, although she had been in poor health. But the essence of the two-part podcast is everything about these vignettes that she tells, the memories of working with some of the greatest stars in all of entertainment and battling through mental illness while fulfilling this 60-year career on film and stage and TV. She's more than the identical cousins, and she did a tremendous job in really trying to bring back particularly the memories of her manic moments and the work she did trying to make it right with those who she put in a certain amount of distress while she was enduring her mental illness, both before her diagnosis and even after. It's a great book, and it was a fun two-part interview to do, an important one to do with Bill Jankowski. So it's called Patty Duke in the Presence of Greatness, Parts 1 and 2. Patty Duke is an icon, was an icon. We will always remember Patty Duke. We will always remember Esther Roll. And what we don't know about Esther Roll, who you may recall was the mom from Good Times, Esther Roll had in and of herself a fantastic career before she ever made it to Good Times. Good Times was a Norman Lear spin-off of Maude, which was a spin-off of All in the Family. That is a tremendous lineage. It was a tremendous opportunity and a big door that Norman Lear opened purposefully to bring a Black American family sitcom to primetime. What we didn't know, well, what maybe was understood then, but then sort of forgotten and never really celebrated, is the work and the tremendous ultimatum that Esther Roll put to the writers and the producers in order to ensure that the Evans family that we saw on TV in Good Times was in fact a full family. It had a mother and a father living in the projects, working their way up to a better life. And it's a great episode. It's called Esther Roll's Hope for Good Times. I really, really recommend it. Esther Roll was a persister. Now, in the areas of leadership, where would we be in leadership today without Shonda Rhimes as the quintessential, the awesome showrunner that she is? She has created some really great episodes. I found in reading Shonda's book, A Year of Yes, from just a few years ago, that while she just puts it out there as some life advice, it's also some really great leadership lessons. She is the real deal. The advice that she offers is framed in her own perspective. She came from humble beginnings. She expresses gratitude and credit where it is due in terms of her continuing to work her way into places of opportunity where she delivered really quality writing and ultimately now is using her imagination to reframe what we see on TV today. So if you get a chance, listen to the podcast, Shonda Rhimes' Leadership Lessons from Year of Yes. And while some might not consider MTV's series Daria to be a place where we can find leadership, if you've been paying attention to headlines and news reports and social media of the last few years and the resurgence of a feminist movement, and one that really has run out of patience and is jaded and is skeptical and yet is wildly optimistic about the future, you don't have to walk far to see the origins of this voice in Daria's voice. So while Daria has been off of the air for 20 years and there's talk of a reboot, the best you can do, whether you've ever seen Daria or not, is first listen to the podcast called Daria's Impact on Feminism, and then go binge 65 episodes of Daria and have a great time doing it. Finally, we get to the areas of achievement. And the two that really come to mind, they were, again, really fun episodes to produce, really fun to do the research on. And the first was a great visit that I took to the University of Michigan to interview Dr. Robin Means Coleman, because Dr. Robin Means Coleman is probably behind Debbie Allen, the woman in the world who knows the most about what Debbie Allen did and how she reshaped a different world to make it so Hillman-esque, to make it so authentic within the realm of students attending a historic Black college or university, as Debbie Allen did, taking the helm of a different world at the beginning of its second season. So Dr. Coleman and I just explore all of the different nuanced details that she is so well versed in as she writes and teaches about media studies, gender studies, and race as we see it in media today. It's a great episode. It's called Debbie Allen Reshapes a Different World. Lastly, you know what, listeners, do you know what an EGOT is, right? An EGOT is an individual, or it's the attainment of the 4 major entertainment awards: the Emmy, the Grammy, the Oscar, and the Tony. And there are just a small handful of women who have earned the EGOT. And in part, it's because the Grammy is a little difficult to obtain. Grammys end up, if you're a musician, then you have a better shot of being a very low-profile person who's in the trenches who earns an EGOT. And most of the musical world in entertainment is still filled with men. But an EGOT winner who is still very vibrant on TV, and aren't we loving it, is Rita Moreno. So the episode about reboots One Day at a Time and Rita Moreno is somewhat about Rita and an incredible career, and the fact that she is still cranking out, dishing the best lines probably of her life on One Day at a Time, the reboot. But we also have to look at the importance even of the original of One Day at a Time. So it's an achievement because in terms of all of the conversations that we're having, the easy money is going to come through a reboot. What? Because somebody else has already done the work and created the fan network? I'm not so sure. But Norman Lear, in rebooting One Day at a Time, took on a very different, he recreated it, making it significantly different, just as relevant as the original was. So that whole podcast is about, it really takes you from the 70s and the original all the way up to today, and how it is that Rita Moreno has just put this great crowning touch. If you appreciate the fact that Netflix is willing to take risks and to bring this sort of thing forward, please listen to the podcast about One Day at a Time, reboots, and Rita Moreno. She is an achiever, there's no question, and an inspiration. Listeners, it has been a joy over this past year to interact with you on Twitter, to really gain a Twitter following and exchange and share and retweet other great podcasts about women in TV, great podcasts about women achievers in general, and continue building a community that appreciates the tremendous talent that we're just trying to share and report on and get in front of other people who just maybe haven't thought about it because there's just not a lot of people celebrating it. It has been an honor to receive emails and emails and emails with great ideas for future podcast episodes. I will say the Daria one came from somebody who said, "It's time. Don't you hear her voice?" And I had to agree. And that moved to the top of the list really quickly. Some of the ideas are percolating still. I've just got a long list of shows and individuals who need to be profiled, need to have a certain aspect brought forward. But again, what I'm really trying to do is bring a value to you, to frame it in the context that you're going to get something out of it as a lesson of persistence or leadership or achievement. I am fascinated by the number of people who study and who care about TV and representation and equity and pay equity. And a reminder, listeners, just how important it is that while it might not seem like the Time's Up and Me Too movements regarding pay equity and sexual harassment, it might seem elite or exclusive. It isn't, because we are in the process of such great social change, and media has such a powerful influence over all other aspects of life, that the fact that it is happening at this highest level, you are in fact seeing other industries being called on some of the same behaviors that now finally are receiving enough public recognition from the entertainment industry that the tolerance is done. The intolerance is speaking wildly and loudly. So that helps influence what it is that I'm looking for as we continue to watch older episodes, as we continue to talk about some of the classic TV episodes, because there's a framework and there is an understanding, and we can't just dismiss some of this great work because it was done at a time when the laws were not as protective as they are today, because we don't know what the laws of tomorrow will be. So the most we can do is understand the shoes that older women who are still with us, who are watching the same TV that we're watching, who are seeing the same headlines, how do we keep having this conversation in a way that we are informed, that we can appreciate what has gone before us, and that they then, in finding a calm point of common bond, can then begin to also understand what women are facing today. We have to remain on each other's side. I am thrilled, listeners, that in this year we earned trademark status from the U.S. Trademark and Patent Office to use the words Advanced TV Herstory together in 3 words as our owned copyrighted trademark. And that's really kind of cool. And it was a pledge that I felt was really important to make to myself, to honor the investment in the research and the time that has taken to build this show, and keeps me going, that it is going to be something bigger and better down the road, because I sure didn't know 3 years ago this is where we'd be today. And also in this past year, we have participated in podcast marathons. We supported a film festival because I'm a firm believer that media does not exist in silos. The issues that we're reporting on, representation and pay equity and good writing and things, these people are now flowing, these women are flowing back and forth from TV to film to independent film. And we cannot rest on little boundaries that exist just because it's radio or TV or film or stage. That's why I supported the Athena Film Festival. That's why I made an effort to be there for as much as I could, because it was great networking. And it all revolves around the headlines of the day. What does the coming year hold? Well, I can tell you this. We will continue to look at full series. We will continue to look at women who move behind TV, whether they are as writers or producers in the crews. They have been in TV and are now doing other things. They are fan scholars. They are fan promoters. They are, in fact, agents of change within the entertainment realm. Those are the kinds of people we are seeking out. Some as interviews, some as good old-fashioned scripts and clips, because that's really where I have a chance then to build in that higher level of context. You will also occasionally get that single episode, like I did with That Girl and Sexual Harassment, where I tell you, here I was doing just a random research on Marlo Thomas and trying to get the framework of what that first season of That Girl was like, and then boom, episode 24, and my jaw dropped. I just stopped and I said, I have to do an episode on this single episode of That Girl, season 1, episode 24. If you haven't listened to That Girl and Sexual Harassment, this is some of the direction that I hope we can take, because what Marlo Thomas has given us with that one episode is as important as sitting through any 3-hour lecture about the history of feminism or anything, because you see it, and we're smart today. We are paying a lot of attention. That's the stuff that you can expect to hear here at Advanced TV Herstory, and that you will begin seeing more of if you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Now, the last thing I want to leave you with, listeners, is something that I have been building into many of my scripts, and that is the importance of sharing this podcast, this audio file, with women, people in your life who are classic TV fans, who are feminists, who just simply are intimidated by the concept of subscribing to a podcast, somehow downloading it, and then somehow listening. For some, that's just too many steps. However, at almost every place where you can use your phone to download the podcast, you can also, on a Kindle or an iPad or on a desktop, just press play. So at Apple Podcast, at Google Podcast, at Radio Public, at tvherstory.com, which is our website, or at YouTube, you can find it, do the quick search, and there it is. Press play, and you're off to the races. Doing your laundry, washing your dishes, cleaning the refrigerator. Not sure why I always equate listening to this podcast with cleaning, but I think there's something therapeutic maybe about having that shared experience. Because listeners, this is it's been a tremendous road so far. I do not see an end in sight. There is more content out there than I can possibly process, which is why we created a Patreon account this past year as well. Because there are other people who are doing work for me to ensure that this high-quality production is distributed, that it looks good, that it sounds good, and that it continues to reach you in as many different ways, you and your network in as many different ways as possible. So those are the big accomplishments of this past year, and a little tease, I guess, as to what you can expect as a listener coming up in this year. There are so many smart people to connect with, so many great elements of content to look forward to, and all I can ask is that you stay tuned to receive more TV herstory in your ears and on your computer. If you don't already, you can always find us on Twitter at TV Herstory. Please follow us. Please follow us on Instagram at Advanced TV Herstory. You can find us on Facebook. We do have a page, Advanced TV Herstory. A podcast is what that's called. And YouTube, it's Advanced TV Herstory. By all means, send an email. Tell us what you're thinking. Tell us what you'd like to see in this next coming year. I am open to all ideas and have been known to juggle the calendar, juggle the schedule at the last minute in order to make sure that something really relevant is coming forward. So send us an email at advancedtvherstory@gmail.com. And yes, Patreon. So Patreon is where you can go if you find that you value this podcast, that you value the content, you understand that you're not hearing advertisements or promotions of any sort, but this is your way of putting a couple bucks in the bucket and helping to ensure that the show is delivered for a long time to come. Patreon, you can go to patreon.com and enter in Advanced TV Herstory, or go to tvherstory.com, scroll down to where it says Become a Patron. And thank you, Rochelle, for being the first patron. You have no idea what that means. Anywhere you find a podcast, we'll be there because there's so much to talk about with TV women. This is Why I Podcast. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams.